Marcella, when I was talking to Tom,
And we have already, I guess, a rough number will be 10 people on the line.
We have 18,
So yes.
19.
Well, yeah, but it's
growing.
five, 6 of us. So participants, I guess, will be around about 10. Yeah, but I'm not twice, so. Oh, it's very serious. Okay.
I think we're close enough to 2 o'clock. I'd like to welcome everybody. I guess I'm the representative of the stewards of the STS Roundtable. So welcome to our first webinar of 2019. We're in respect for time. We're going to forego introductions among each other. If you want to put on the chat where you are, what you do, that type of thing, we can do that on chat, and then we can just get started with the presentation. Does that make sense to everyone? Just, I guess, yeah, it makes sense to me, and not everybody's a picture. So, so I'll just pass it off to Doug, Bernard, and Don, and let them get started. Go ahead, Doug.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you to the Roundtable for giving us this opportunity to share with you People-Powered Innovation Labs, which we're very excited about, and as I said, also excited to be able to share with you not only kind of an overview of this particular approach, which weaves together 3 very effective and powerful approaches to organizational change, organizational redesign, and also is quite contemporary with the kind of this surge in focus amongst organizations across multiple sectors regarding innovation. I thought the quickest thing by way of introductions is we'll just walk across these 3 pictures, starting with Bernard. I was going to make some comment about the pictures, but I think they speak for themselves. Bernard, quick introduction.
quick introduction. As I've said in the chat, I'm in Portland, Maine. I'm an expat Canadian. I do whole systems design, and what brings me here is for most of my career, and I have been doing professional consulting for about 45 years. For most of my career, I have been passionate about working with folks in organizations to create a flourishing environment, a place that is successful economically, successful in terms of the services and products it provides, and very importantly, successful in terms of the kind of environment that it provides for the people that work within the system. So that's my passion, and that's why I'm here.
I'm Don Guerre. I'm a retired faculty member of the Department of Applied Human Sciences at Concordia University, where I teach and research in human systems intervention. I've been there for about 20 years, and before that, I had a career as an independent consultant in organization design. My passion is participative democracy, engaging people in real ways that are effective for them.
Thanks, Don. Doug Austrom here. I'm consultant, organizational consultant based in Indianapolis, also an adjunct professor with Indiana University Kelley School of Business, teaching courses on organizational change, strategic value innovation, positive people practices, leadership, things like that. And my passion and interest is how do we foster and promote human systems, organizations that are good for the human spirit rather than spirit suckers that destroy the spirit and the passion of people. A long-term interest in socio-technical systems and a kind of a parallel interest in how do you create organizations that truly deliver value for customers and clients, while at the same time being humane, and then as Bernard said, foster prosperity, good for people, and also the planet. This focus on the customer and adding real value also brought me to design thinking and innovation. And what I saw in design thinking was a really wonderful packaging of many of the things that are and have been part of very successful organizations focus on the customer. So that's by way of introductions. Please use the chat room. If you've got questions, we'll monitor that throughout the webinar and respond in real time. We don't have a really significant block of time at the end for Q&A, so we'll bounce back and forth between the questions we see in the chat room and answer them as well as we can when we see them emerge or as they fit. So the agenda, part of the reason that we're really excited to be with you today in this webinar is the chance to share a recent use case. The use of people-powered innovation labs with a next school project. How that particular initiative unfolded, and perhaps even more importantly, the things we learned in the process of that particular use case. And throughout this, we also want to share with you both the why of people-powered innovation, the what and the hows. And then to sort of wrap it up with a discussion around some of the challenges that executives face, the fit and the limitations also of people-powered innovation labs. So Q&A already referenced, and then Bernard will wrap things up for us with some closing comments. Bernard, next slide.
Thank you. Hang on here. So the next few minutes are going to be me interviewing Don de Guerre. Don is the rock star who, in our little group, who did this work in Quebec with some schools. And let me just start by asking you, Don, what were they trying to do, and what are they trying to do in Quebec?
Trying to update the education system to be relevant to students and parents and the community. The old 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, are not what students need to learn today. Students need to understand entrepreneurship, critical thinking, and some other skills. So the entire education system, as technology changes our society, the entire education system, like all other systems, is changing.
So it sounds like, yeah, go ahead.
They're trying to do that in a participative bottom-up way, focusing on changing structure, because all the other efforts they've made over the past 30 years that have not changed structure have not worked.
So it sounds like it's more than a policy writing project, but is it really more than a project of just changing the boxes on the Department of Education org chart.
Yes, absolutely. It's a total paradigm shift.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, the old bureaucracy with policies and top-down control does not work. So, for example, in this project, we had teachers, parents, community members, community organizations, administrators, all working together, and that's a brand new experience. And designing their own school for the future.
Okay, well, that sounds interesting. So you had actual stakeholders at the ground level, the teachers and the students and parents somehow involved in redesigning some aspect of the schools that they were working in. So let me ask you about this phase one, which is on the top left-hand side, where it says research and development of the framework. Of what framework? A framework for what?
A framework for what they call the next school. Learn Quebec Incorporated is the organization that's doing this work with the schools. And they traveled the world for systems thinking. They met with Peter Senge for a week and looked at new schools, new education systems, and what's going on to pick the best practices that they could and write that into a framework as a guide for phase two and the rest of the project.
Okay. So on the right-hand side, to the right of the arrow, it looks like those might be outcomes from each phase. And I see on the right-hand side, you've got an acronym called STARK. And you talk about a prototype, number one. Could you explain those two things? Because they seem to be outcomes or products of phase one.
The STARK system was invented in phase one with the realization that when you design a school, you're really having to design 5 subsystems as well as the whole system. So STARK stands for space, and the new school will have innovative, flexible spaces both inside the school, outside the school, and in the community. T stands for time, and today high school students go to class for 52 minutes in one class and then 52 minutes in the next class, and why it's 52 minutes nobody knows, but learning doesn't happen that way. So the time spaces will be flexible and adaptable as the students learn, tailored to the student learning as the center of the education system. A stands for andragogy, which I've already said is student-centered learning, project-based learning, learning in the community with real projects, and then pulling out of those projects the reading, writing, and arithmetic that people need to know. R stands for relational, which is the relations within the school between parents, students, teachers, administrators, community organizations. And C stands for community, which is a recognition of the relationships across the boundary of the school with various parts of the community. And when you start to map that, schools are involved in almost all parts of the community.
And thank you. And then it also says next school prototype 1. Now, what does that mean, next school prototype 1?
The research and development people got so excited, they couldn't really do their work without some vision of the next school. So they presented a design for each of the STARK subsystems as part of their final report. And in order to allow the participants in phase 2 to really be engaged in designing their own next school vision, we labeled that next school that the research and development people did as prototype 1, and phase 2 is then looking for prototype 2.
Got it. Thank you. So as I scan the blue boxes on the left-hand side, this looks like a 4-year roadmap from 2016 to 2020 Can you just walk us through the roadmap, what happens in each phase very briefly on a high level?
Well, phase one I've described.
Yep.
Phase two is the work that we did with them, which we're going to go into detail. And the outcomes of that work were practical systems for each of the Stark systems and prototypes for the whole school. So each Stark subsystem had innovation, design, modeling for the design they had, a storyboard, and a summary template that were actual products produced that feed into phase three that are called Explore Schools, because in phase three, we want to take real schools, students, teachers, parents who know each other and work together in one school, and have them design their application locally of what was learned in phases 1 and 2. Phase 3 is launching initial learning clusters in 3 schools. And a learning cluster might be 110 students, 10 teachers, some parents, and community organization that might be like a client system for them, where they self-design and self-organize their own learning curriculum. Phase 5 is a scale up and scale out of the initial learning clusters in phase 3. And phase 5 starts in 2020, but it might take 10 years to move across the school system because it's not top down, it's bottom up. And each school has to learn something like the people-powered innovation process in order to design their school and their learning clusters.
Just give me some sense of the size of the system. How many schools are we talking about? Just ballpark.
Well, we're talking about the English language part of the school system, and I think there's about 80 schools. There's 9 school boards.
80?
Something like that.
Yeah, okay. And they're spread all across Quebec, which is a fairly large geographic area.
Very large.
Yeah, okay.
Nice traveling to the North Shore for a meeting in January.
Right. So it's pretty fascinating, the high-level roadmap that's been developed. It really starts with, a scan of what do we know so far, what has research taught us and so on. And it develops, then it really developed in phase 1 a framework for the more detailed design. Now I see in phase 2, it says people-powered innovation lab work. So I'm assuming that's where you came into the picture. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, then let's drill down on that. Let me see if I can switch the slide to the next one. And here's phase 2 exploded a little bit. Could you walk us through this a little bit? You started with an introductory evening. When was it? Who was there? What happened? What was the outcome?
There were about 50 people there. As I said, administrators, teachers, parents, consultants, community organizations. And we gave them an experience of a top-down control system and a more democratic bottom-up system with an exercise. So they got an understanding immediately of the differences between the old system and the new system. We gave them some experience of the design process by having them design a name tag and introductory session for conferences like this. Because of course they didn't know each other. They worked from all across the entire system. And so they had to meet each other and begin. And an understanding of the why, what, and how of this innovation and design project with a presentation by the people from Learn that did the research and development framework and a direction of where they're going through this process.
So a quick question about who was in the room for that introductory evening? What was their role? Was that the design team for this project? What was the connection of the people in the room to the people who had done the research and prototype number 1?
The people who had done the research and prototype number 1 sent out an invitation letter to all schools, all teachers, all administrators in the entire system. About 50 people volunteered to use their professional development days to participate in this project.
Nice. And you said about 50 people were using their professional development days. So that sounds like you had mostly people within the, like on salaries within the school system. Is that right?
Yes, I don't remember exactly, but I think there were something like half a dozen community organizations.
Okay.
And there were some educational consultants that regularly work with that system.
All right. Any parents or students?
There were two kinds of parents. One parent is on the parent committee. Each school has a parent committee.
Yeah.
So there are parents within the school system. And then there were parents that are from the community, not involved in the school system. Number of parents, again, maybe 10. And what was the other?
Any students?
No students.
Okay.
The students will get involved at the local level with their local school in phase 3.
Okay, right. So that takes me back to the high level roadmap. And I think one of the things that I noticed about it that was pretty impressive is that even though this was a 50-person design team that went through these 6 boxes that you have listed here, there's going to be an opportunity and an intentional opportunity for people to redesign the design that these folks come up with. Is that correct?
Exactly. The transition was a 3-day educational workshop with people from phase 2 and the 8 schools from phase 3.
Okay. So then you move into the first lab in our model, which is the People-Powered Innovation Lab model, which we call the Initiate Lab. Tell me, how long did that take, and was it the same 50 people, and what happened?
About 30 to 35 people showed up at each lab. We had the 50 people in the introductory evening, but that was the only time all 50 were there.
Mm-hmm.
On the Initiate Lab, they began to understand the innovation and design process in more detail, and they worked on reframing the inquiry topic. As you know, Bernard, we found that having the right inquiry topic or design challenge or innovation challenge is one of the most important, if not the most important thing for people to come up with stretch designs. So they reframed the inquiry topic and then understood the process that they were going in. At the end of the Initiate Lab, everyone said, we're ready to go to work. We know what we're doing and why and how. Let's go.
Okay. So both in this section or this activity, the Initiate Lab, you talk about inquiry, and then as we move to the next block here, the Inquire Lab, we talk about inquiry again. Just to help to clarify for our audience, if you would, what's the difference between this inquiry and the first inquiry that was done in phase 1 of this whole project?
Well, the Initiate Lab came up with an inquiry topic. The inquiry topic was something like, when schools are able to help every student discover their full and develop their full potential, what will the school look like?
Mm-hmm.
Then in the Inquire Lab, we wanted to begin to inquire into that topic, to find out what we knew about it, what our strengths and abilities and assets were in relation to be able to answer the inquiry topic question.
Okay. So I'm sorry. So back in phase 1, the research and development was more around what's out there in the world that we can learn from. And it sounds like in phase 2, the research, or I'm using the word research synonymously with inquiry, was more about what is it that we can learn from our own world here in the schools in Quebec. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you. Tell me about some of the other things that are listed in the Inquire Lab in the bottom half of that block?
Well, they went through an inquiry process that really comes from appreciative inquiry to understand what they called empathic appreciative interviewing. And then they developed a series of questions that were general for all 5 START groups. And then they developed a series of questions that were specific to each START group.
Okay.
And with that, they developed an inquiry plan for each of the START subsystems to go out in the homework phase and implement those questions with their peers, so that when they came back to the Imagine Lab, they had information from which they could pull the insights.
Got it. So just going back a sec to a slightly higher level, each of these labs was about how long, and in terms of time, and what was the amount of time between each lab?
Each of the labs was between 6 and 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And the time between the labs was about 1 month.
Okay. Why do you call them labs?
Because a laboratory is exploratory and innovative and searching. It's not top-down teaching series of lectures, small group tasks, etc. It's more flexible. They called it messy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have in the chat window, I see a question from Joe Norton, and he's asking a 2-part question. Part 1 is, were these labs, these sessions in the labs themselves self-facilitated, or was there support?
There was a consulting team consisting of myself and 2 colleagues from Montreal,
Mm-hmm.
both who have experience in design thinking. And we handled the large group sessions. We did the reflection with the client system and co-designed with the client system lab by lab. So we would meet, look at what happened in the Initiate lab and design the Inquire lab. The small groups were self-facilitated, except that part of the arrangement between people-powered innovation labs and the client system was that we would train 3 of their consultants to be able to do this process with schools across Quebec. So Learn Quebec Inc. is developing their own approach to people-powered innovation with their own consultants as a consequence of our workshop with them. We left that knowledge with them.
So that's really the other part of Joe's question is, did we intentionally support the development of large group facilitation capability? And I think the answer is yes.
Yes.
Yes to that.
The Learn consultants were in the small groups.
Yeah.
And Joe, we also used some free radicals from incubators and innovation labs in Montreal. We occasionally would bring someone in to put some creative thinking and ideas from an expert designer into the groups.
Got it. And it sounds like you and the consulting team, your role in these labs was first and foremost to design the lab, right?
Yes. And we co-designed it with
and then during the lab you facilitated, yes. Okay. And then during the lab you facilitated the plenary sessions during the lab. But during the labs, when there were small group activities, those small group activities were self-managed.
That's right.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the Imagine Lab. First of all, why is it called Imagine?
Because it's getting outside of the box. It's diverging. It's looking for ideas that we haven't done. It's how might we do things, not how have we done things.
Okay. And it looks like you had 4 outcomes, or actually 3 outcomes. I think there's an extra bullet in there. So 3 outcomes. Can you tell us about those? Again, this was like a 6 to 8 hour session. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, one of the things about the people-powered innovation process is that it's emergent and innovative.
Yeah.
So with this particular client system, they have a lot of knowledge. They're really highly skilled. They know how to run schools. So getting them outside of that knowledge and into diverging, so that they don't focus in on what to do, but they're diverging and searching for what they've never thought of before, new ideas, breakthroughs. We did the Imagine Lab, parts of it basically twice. We recycled and repeated the process.
Mm-hmm.
The insights that they pulled out of possible innovations are listed in their reports. There were many. Some were specific, some were more general. They talked about those innovations from different specialist positions, the administrator's perspective, the specialist perspective, the teacher's perspective. What would be the consequences of these innovations? They spent a lot of time there. They developed some provocative solutions that would satisfy administrators, teachers, parents, etc. And then each group picked the best provocative solution to develop a model. The model they developed could be a storyboard, could be a physical model built with clay and Tinker Toys and things like that. It could be just a diagram, mapping of relations. So that's what came out of that lab.
Nice, thank you. You know, this is such an interesting story that I realize that we're spending a lot of time on it and we're running a little bit behind schedule. Could you just summarize the last 2 labs for us?
The Invigorate lab, they took their models, tested them and revised them in the lab, and then went out and tested and revised them between the lab and the final lab. That's it. And then the integration lab, they used what they got between the labs, testing and refining their models in the field to produce a final prototype. And they explored the integration of the Stark subsystems. They had designed 5 subsystems, but they obviously are interdependent and interactive. They were fine. They developed a final presentation template to take forward to the director generals of the ministry and the rest of the world. And that's all online. If anyone wants to get more detail on this stuff, send me an email and I'll send you a link to their report.
Great. And so we have a quick question from, one question from Barry Campson, and he would like to know, he said you use the term empathic AI interviews, and he's asking, what does the word empathic add to traditional AI practice?
Barry, I don't think it necessarily adds anything, but in the middle of this process, the IDEO education design thinking package came out. People got that and read it, and they used the language empathic interviews. So it just got into the system, and rather than fight about it, we just included both words.
Got it. Then a quick question from Gita Bach. She says, how did you enter into the school boards?
We did not enter into the school boards. Learn Quebec, Gita, actually Noel Burke and Michael from the CEO of Learn Quebec met with each school board, each director general, but we did not have relations with that part of the system.
Okay. I'm going to move us on. Here. Would you mind just walking us through this slide? This is sort of a retrospective on phase 2 of this work, which is the phase that we just did a deep dive into. And you have here, sounds like 3 key insights and reminders and and what you think are some implications for future work of this kind. Would you just kind of walk us through that?
Well, we know that preparation is critical. When you're working with multiple different clients in different phases of development with complex work systems and really complex ecosystems, preparation becomes even more critical. And the best thing would be to start at the beginning of the project. Often as designers or consultants were brought in after the framework in phase one is developed, for example, or after the client system knows what they want and they can ask for a written proposal. That's too late. You need to be brought in when they first start thinking about it. And the thing is to know that the estimate of the time it's going to take is way longer than you think. Particularly as projects get more complex, this becomes even more critical. The PPL mindset and process is foreign to most client systems. I mentioned that we had difficulty getting outside the box. We can co-design it, adapt it with the participants. We can recycle and do it again, but that requires the time and resources to be allotted for it in advance. Limited to 5 professional development days. A normal professional development day is 9 to 3. We work 9 to 4, 9 to 5 at times. Mm-hmm. This has to be negotiated with the client system, and you need that flexibility.
Just a quick follow-up. The PPL mindset and process is foreign. By mindset, do you mean the idea of people within the system working to redesign the system, or do you mean something else?
Well, one example that pops to my mind right now is the small group phenomena.
Yeah.
This system was very used to working in small groups. So you get on a team, you develop relationships, you argue, you get into conflict, you work it out, and then you get a solution. We don't do that. We do what we call a shuffle. So if you're involved in a small group working on a particular part of the task, at the end of that, we do the shuffle, and half the group moves to the next group. So we're interested in mashing up the thinking, mixing things up, and we're interested in the whole system design, not small group work. These people had tremendous difficulty when we told them to do the shuffle.
Yeah.
We've built relationships here. We want to stay here. So there's a mindset shift to understand what you're doing and new ways of doing it.
Got it. Thank you. So talk about the social system innovation design thing.
Well, I think I've said that.
Okay.
But what we're learning is that when you design an innovation in a social system, it's not just in that system. It's also related to all of the stakeholders and all of the people who have any vested interest in that system. And we need to be able to engage and involve those people today. Technology is driving us that way because through social media, we know what happened everywhere in the world every instant. So you're not as independent as you once were. And we need to understand multiple client relations and co-creation processes, and it has to be done all at once. So that's why we go to a 50-person, I'd say, design community, rather than design team or village of designers to be engaged in the design process. And that means the process becomes very hard to manage, maybe unmanageable, and messy. And people need to learn that that's okay and we can do that and it's positive and work through it. And I think that's where we come in with people-powered innovation that's appreciative and participative and positive. And developing that mindset, that culture, that way of being is a key role for the designers.
So there's a connected question, a follow-up question from Gita. She asks, how did you get to work in the English language school system in Quebec? I think she's asking, who was your client, and And who is the formal and legal sponsor of this project and things like that?
Formal legal sponsor is the Ministry of Education, the 9 Directors Generals of the English Language Education System. They contracted with Learn Quebec, and Learn Quebec approached us and asked if we would be interested in doing this.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Well, that sounds very complex and exciting and helpful, and I thank you for sharing it with everybody.
My pleasure.
Back one, Bernard.
Back one. Sorry.
No.
Yes. Yes.
Right
Is
back.
that it?
So that last statement about the complexity is a really important segue, and one of the kind of key parameters here is that we're looking at organizations. We're looking at work systems. We're as it said, it's networks, it's ecosystems, it's the relationship across sector, between sectors, even to the nation states. And that complexity also leads to the messiness of all this. And as these quotes suggest, the rate of innovation and development in technology is progressing exponentially. The rate of innovation in our social systems, our work systems, our organizations, our networks and ecosystems is a much straighter flat line, and we can't move as quickly as the technological system innovations if we seek to use traditional models and traditional ways of thinking of controlling the social system, as much as beginning to think about how do we unleash the power within the social system. And of course, we're referring to people power. And a strengths-based approach builds on people's passions, builds on their energy and their dreams and is inspiring, with emphasis on the in and then inspiring. Energizing, exciting. The approach that we're describing is highly participative, highly sensitive to the voice of the whole system, and getting that voice in the room together to wrestle with what the opportunity or the challenge is that they want to pursue, the dreams they want to pursue. And design thinking, as I said earlier, is a nice packaging of some steps and techniques along the way. The power comes from the participation of the people in the system or connected to the system and the solutions that are being provided. So we're primarily focused on social system innovation, organizational innovation, work system innovation, those sorts of things. Could it be used with products? I suppose it could. But it really is about unleashing the power and the passion of the people who make up these systems, and then starting to get the exponential curve in terms of social innovation. So what's this really mean then? What people-powered innovation labs, accelerated implementation, fairly immediate personal growth amongst those who participate, new relationships with which to build the future and to build on for the future. It unleashes the collective genius. As I mentioned, it inspires, engages, creates excitement and much fuller real support and understanding of the people in the system, for those the system serves, and others who have a vested interest of whatever the sort might be in that particular ecosystem. And it does require true partnership between the system leaders, however that's construed, and also the people-powered innovation labs resources. Scalability. I mean, you can use elements of this in as short as a day, or you can progress over a period of time, and kind of like expanding circles and expanding the network of connections and engaging ever more of the social system, depending on the complexity. And it really does require leveraging and educating of internal resources. So it's building capability in the process and along the way. And it has to be customizable to the local culture and cultures of the subunits or the nodes in the network, or whatever makes up the particular ecosystem, particular organization.
Doug,
And
let me just ask jump in and ask a quick question of Don. Don, as you look
Sure.
at these 6 factors, 6 benefits, which of these benefits were important to your client's system?
Collective genius, true partnership, scalability, leveraging and training internal resources, and customizability.
Okay.
Accelerated implementation wasn't that important.
Yeah.
People did report personal growth. One comment from a participant was, Don, you made us work. We've never done that before. We're used to looking up, getting the direction, going down and doing our work, and then feeding the product up, and usually getting negative feedback and going down to do more work. We're not used to working together.
Got it. So it sounds like at least 5 of the 6 were important to the system, and a little bit of the 6th. Thanks. Doug, I cut you off. I'm sorry. Let me give it back to you.
Not a problem. And the power of this approach, as I said, is people, but it's really about adopting a whole systems perspective. One of the critiques of design thinking is that it focuses very heavily on parts and is not as integrative across the whole system. And so this does bring a whole systems perspective, strengths-based, using the precepts and practices of appreciative inquiry. And all of these bring, we think, significant enhancements to the design thinking approach. And it can be used with single organizations or units within an organization, certainly within networks and ultimately with ecosystems. And it because it's a whole systems way of thinking and working, it can lead to greater overall prosperity and impact. Great places to work and good work for the individuals. Remarkable service, whether that's in a for-profit or not-for-profit or government agency. And along the way, positive social impact. So the potential is there, but as we all know, it starts with people.
Thanks, Doug. Don, would you talk to us about this slide? How, what Doug just told us, I heard as, PPIL is the next best thing to sliced bread, which I happen to agree with. But can we drill down on that a little bit and say, well, how does it actually do its magic? What are the underlying practices or principles that help PPIL do some of that stuff?
Well, I'd love to be able to answer that question. What I think, and I talk with my clients about, is that it's also a cultural change process. One of the participants at the end of the work, when it was presented to the steering committee that the participants were invited to attend, and one of the participants said, we did a lot more than just design a new school. We learned, we changed, we grew, and we developed a new culture. a culture of positive relations, and we want to go forward with that. We don't want to stop here. We don't want our job done. So how are you going to include us in phase 3, 4, and 5? And I think the core principle is what I call radical participation, full involvement, where people really learn that they're not going to be facilitated, they're not going to be trained, they're not going to be controlled, but they have the power, and if they work together, they can do great things. And when people get that, they develop very positive and effective human relations, group dynamics, and they're very innovative and creative.
Just a small question. On the left-hand column, it has some initials bolded. What do those signify?
AI is appreciative inquiry, WS is whole systems, and DT is design thinking.
Okay.
And it's the integration of all three that produce the results.
Got it. Okay. So far, I think we have responded to every question that has been posted in the Zoom group chat. If folks are listening and have other questions, please don't hesitate to post them. Let me move to the next slide. Wrong one. Here we are. So I wanted to speak to this one. And again, I think we're trying here to be clear that we don't think this is a panacea, that it works for everybody everywhere. But we do think there are certain groups of people that it works for, and there are certain kinds of challenges or problems or opportunities that it works for. So I think the people that it works for best, I think, are business leaders who really want to drive customer experience, they want to drive economic results, and they want to build a flexible organization. Because I think, as Don and Doug have pointed out, the work that's done within the PPIL process looks at the need for, or the opportunities to improve the customer experience. And in Don's case, it was the experience of the teachers and the students and the parents. It looks at economic results, and the process builds a flexible organization as people learn the skills and the capabilities to innovate on the go. A second group that we're focused on are healthcare leaders. For the last 20 years or so, I've been working in healthcare, and increasingly the requests I get are, can you help us accelerate innovation that actually delivers measurable impact on costs and patient and staff experiences. So again, I think PPIL is specifically designed to do that, in part because of the lens of whole systems. Now, we don't have an opportunity to go into the whole systems lens, but I think I can quickly say that the whole systems lens suggests that you need to look not just at people, not just at the customer experience, and not just at the economics of the business or the service, but all of those, how they intertwine, and how they intertwine within the organization that has been constructed to let people achieve results in those areas. The third area, of course, is education. Don's case example was a wonderful example of an educational leader or group of leaders committed to delivering high quality, affordable, relevant education. And we also think, although we haven't had a chance to work with social entrepreneurs, but we think that there are social entrepreneurs out there who we know are passionate about finding collaborative solutions, and this process could fit for them. It's not a great process if you want to redesign a toaster, because it's really focused on addressing challenges that have to do with innovation and how people work with each other, whether it's in the educational setting, the business setting, the healthcare setting, or the social setting. So it is a good process, or if you like, a good process, if you're facing any of the following executive challenges. If you need to refresh your business model or your operating model, And I think you can focus on one or two or both of them. If you need to improve collaboration and coordination across silos and levels, in part because it does this anyways, but it's a great process to actually directly hone in on that. Again, if you need to create a culture of innovation that shifts the culture from, we've always done it this way, to a culture of how might we, which is a huge shift, I think, as we all know. A process that works on building on strengths and what people value and making sure they take into the future what they care about, not only helps to reduce any resistance to that culture shift, but it actually engages them in actually doing the culture shift. If you want to take your service processes, your production processes, your research processes to the next level, to innovate those processes, this is a great approach. If you are looking to leverage key relationships in your ecosystem, this is also a great approach. I'm hoping we have a new book coming out in the fall. It's about designing ecosystems, and we'll be talking about some of these principles in that approach. Reinventing key management processes and structures, I think, is also a very exciting opportunity. So that's where we think PPIL would work. We have just a minute or two left, and I want to get back to we have a couple of unanswered questions. One was, I think, Don, for you, in the context, this is from Antonio Starnino, in the context of the New School project, what are the challenges that you foresee as it moves towards implementation, and how might PPI mitigate or address those challenges? And
I was just responding to Antonio as you speak, Bernard. The major challenge is the mindset shift, but once that's done, there's a whole new set of skills. How does a teacher not become a teacher, but become a facilitator, a designer? How do teachers not work alone in their classroom where they're in charge, but work as a group of teachers with a group of students to co-design with the students? So they have to learn design skills and facilitation skills. How PPIL can help with that is that we have built in a way of thinking and a way of working that Learn Quebec is going to diffuse across the school system.
Great, thank you. And then I have a question which I'd like to address to both Doug and to Don. It's a follow-up question from Gita. Any suggestions on how to use this approach to engage the public and government agencies and business leaders in building a new paradigm for building a framework that will respect and build the well-being of Indigenous people in line with the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations?
Doug?
I'm not sure that I'm the one to answer that directly, because like Bernard, I'm a Canadian, but expat. So I have not been involved or had much visibility around the recommendations of Truth and Reconciliation. My sense is you have to experience the process. You have to find the common ground around an issue and use the strength of these integrated approaches to begin rebuilding relationships. And but it starts with, where's the common ground issue or challenge, which translates then into an inquiry topic or a design challenge that people are passionate about. Don?
Well, what I think in answer to that question is PPIL is very similar to Indigenous ways of working. And if governments begin to shift and begin to learn and begin to move toward this way of thinking and working, there may be possibilities. As I look at design thinking consultancies, they're all talking about more participation, more involvement, and the need for systems thinking. They don't have it, but they're beginning to move in that direction. If they do, we may be able to build critical mass and do what I think you're talking about, Gita. But it's iffy.
So I would say to Gita, you know, if you'd like to, you know, set up a Zoom call with Doug and Don and I, we'd be happy to kick the idea around with you for 15 or 20 minutes. It sounds like such a fascinating and compelling opportunity to me. One more question, and then we'll have to wrap it up. And this is from Carolyn, and the question is, let me see here. How did you engage stakeholders? What made them want to be involved with PPI? And I think that's a question to Don.
I had worked previously with one of the key clients. They really engaged the stakeholders, Carolyn. PPIL worked with them to design and facilitate the labs, but they have previous relationships. People know Noel Burke, for example, and he engaged all the stakeholders. That was done really in phase one and the research and development phase, when agreement to go forward came from the Director Generals, and the Director Generals funded that process.
Thank you, Don. I know there are a couple of more questions. There are a couple more questions, and I wish we had more time. We will have much more time to answer some of these detailed application questions in the 2-day workshop that's coming up in Montreal at Concordia University, and so we'd love to see any or all of you there. Thank you for being part of this, and I'll turn it over to Joe for closing down.
And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, and I'll put in a little pitch for the Socio-Technical Systems Roundtable. We will be opening registration for our fall meeting in Los Angeles, and there's a description of that meeting and the contents that we will share. It's a very, well, self-serving for me to say, it's a very worthwhile learning journey that we're on, and we'd love to have you join us on our journey. So if you want to see more of that, you can look at the STSRoundtable.com website. Thank you all for joining, and look forward to our next webinar.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Doug, are we going to talk?
We can. It's still being recorded.
Yes, I am stopping the recording now.